Hello everyone, so today we're going to talk about disorders of memory. But the first thing I'm going to do is actually do a little memory activity with you, just so we can get a little feel for what it's like to try to remember things in the moment, and also to talk about some of the things that happen with memory. So I'm going to read you a list of words, and then when I pause, go ahead and write them down for yourself, as many as you can remember. All right, here we go. Bed, silence, snoring, tired, turn, quilt, fatigue, night, 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 dark, clock, toss, artichoke, rest, and dream. So go ahead, take a minute on a piece of paper, scribble down as many as you can remember. Alrighty. So what we tend to find here is that people tend to recall the word bed quite a bit because of what's called the primacy effect. Bed was the first word on the list, so our minds say to ourselves, we got to remember this. We're paying really close attention to the first word. A lot of people also remember dream because it was the last word on the list, and this is called the recency effect. It was presented last, it's the most recent information, it's better recalled because the information is still fresh in your mind. Frequency is also another factor, so probably most of you remember the word night because I said it 3 times. So if something is repeated, we tend to remember it more. Then there's distinctiveness. Most students remember artichoke because everything else is about sleep. And so then they're like, why the heck is there the word artichoke? And so it really stands out. And then organization. Many students recall toss and turn together, even though I said them several words apart, just because in our minds, we tend to associate those 2 words. Reconstruction. A lot of people will write down the word sleep, even though it was not on the list anywhere. And that's because all the words except for artichoke actually had to do with sleep. We tend to fill the gaps in our knowledge or memory with words of ideas that we think ought to be there. And so sleep is one that a lot of people will do in this situation. And then some people will use visual imagery when they're trying to recall this. So they'll sort of create a bedroom scene in their mind's eye. So you may have found yourself doing that, trying to remember these things. All right, so we're going to touch very briefly on HM. He's your Ogden case study. He's also mentioned in Culp and Wishaw. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but he is a seminal case in neuropsychology. So we've got to talk about him a little bit. So he had seizures. He had really severe seizures, and they tried to figure out what could we do to stop these. So let's do a bilateral transection of the temporal lobes. And after surgery, they found that he had both anterograde and retrograde amnesia. And we'll get into what those are in more detail in the coming slides. So he couldn't, he had a lot of difficulties with memory. He had memory for some events before the surgery, but for others, he really did not. He was someone with above average IQ. He did really well. And what we eventually found out is the reason that HM had so many problems with memory is because they really took large chunks of his brain, including the hippocampus, that have to do with memory. So this is actually like a 3D printing of HM's brain based on his brain scans. And all the places where there are boxes are where they took out brain where there should be brain. So problematic. So again, Enjoy the case study about him. He's a very famous case. And then definitely watch the videos about him. And there's even one of the neuropsychologists who did a lot of the research with HF. So I highly recommend that you watch that. Her name's Brenda Milner. She's quite famous and well respected in the field. So amnesia is the partial or total loss of memory. And it can happen in many different ways in our many different memory systems. And hopefully this is a review for most of you. But just if you need a little refresher, again, the chapter is pretty great for this, but this is a nice summary of all of the different memory systems that we have. So there's explicit memory, what we know, and this can be both semantic, facts and knowledge you learn, like this PowerPoint, or episodic, which is your personal or autobiographical information. Implicit memory is things we aren't really aware that we've learned. It can be things like skills or habits. And then there's emotional memories as well. And all those are part of long-term memory. We also have a short-term memory. So you can get amnesia in several different ways. So you can have childhood or infantile amnesia, happens early in your life. There's a really rare kind of it called a fugue state. The DSM diagnosis for this is dissociative amnesia with fugue. And this is a form of memory loss when you literally pick up and move, and it can be like several hundred miles all the way across the country. They take on a new identity. And they have no knowledge of their former life. This is usually due to some sort of giant stressor in their life, and it's usually transient, meaning once they're found and they remember, it doesn't happen again. So we're going to talk about anterograde amnesia, and this is not what we typically think of as amnesia. So this is your inability to acquire new memories. So people with anterograde amnesia can't actually make new memories, learn new information, and retain it. They can't get things into long-term memory. You can have global anterograde amnesia, where you have an impairment in the ability to form new memories across a variety of areas. Retrograde amnesia is what we typically think of when we think of what I call sitcom amnesia, right? Where someone gets bopped on the head and they have amnesia, and then magically later they get bopped on the head again and it fixes it. Just like FYI, that's not how brain damage works. You just get more damage, right? This is your inability to access old memories, and it can be incomplete. Can be you don't remember more recent memories. That's what happened to HM. He had this period of, I think it was like 8 to 10 years where he didn't remember, but he remembered from when he was like 16, older, younger rather. But where you don't actually recall things that happened in the past. And so here you see a nice diagram of these different types of amnesia relative to the brain injury. There's also what's called time-dependent retrograde amnesia, and this is, again, commonly produced by a traumatic brain injury, what we sometimes call a TBI. And this severity of injury determines how far back in time the amnesia extends. So if you're essentially, say like no TBI is a good TBI, right? But if you have a less severe TBI, then your amnesia might not be as long. Transient global amnesia is the loss of old memories and inability to form new ones. This can be a one-time event. And again, the non-transient version of this is what HM had. So HM had both retrograde and anterograde amnesia. Herpes simplex encephalitis can lead to anterograde amnesia. You have damage to the insula, and that gives you some retrograde amnesia. And here you can see what the brain scans look like for people who have brain injuries that resulted in retrograde. The next thing we're going to talk about is dementia. Now, dementia is a really tough topic. Many of us in our lives have a friend or a family member or someone else we know who has struggled with dementia, and it's really difficult to watch because it takes away the person that we know, right? And so what you can see here is dementia is really linked to age. So it's rare when you get to 65, retirement age. By the time you're 80, about half of people have some form of dementia. Now, the DSM-5, which came out in 2013, changed how they categorize these, and they call them major or mild neurocognitive disorders. And so most dementias, once we really get into the thick of things, are major neurodegenerative disorders or major neurocognitive disorders. And so these are linked to substantial cognitive decline. It's going to interfere with their ability to function independently, and it can't be related to something else like schizophrenia, for example. Mild neurocognitive disorder is often what someone might be diagnosed with in the early stages of dementia. You have modest cognitive decline, but you can still function at least some way. So one thing people don't realize is there are multiple ways that you can have these neurocognitive disorders or dementias. And most people just think of Alzheimer's disease, but there are all of these different types. So for example, frontotemporal, Lewy body dementia, Parkinson's disease can be linked to dementia. Things that are vascular dementias are very common. So people have strokes or mini strokes can develop dementia. And that mix where you have several of those, prion-related dementias, Huntington's, which we talked about already. You have dementias that can be secondary to other things like encephalitis or MS. You can have it from brain trauma, so chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE is the one that's associated with brain injury in the NFL, for example. And then you can have, when you're in late stage age, you can develop age-related dementia. Syphilis, as we just touched on, can also cause memory problems, including dementia. So I think that that's, if I can tell you one thing to take away from this chapter, it's that Alzheimer's is not the only dementia. We're going to focus on it because it's the most common, but all of these other types of dementia exist and can be a reason you experience very similar symptoms. It doesn't always have to be Alzheimer's. So it accounts for 65% of dementias in people over 65. But again, like taking a step back, that still means that you have 35% of dementias, 35% of dementias that are not accounted for by Alzheimer's. So just again, keep that in the back of your mind. So they believe that a major cause of Alzheimer's is what are called amyloid plaques. And these are found in your cerebral cortex, and they're related to cognitive decline, and it's surrounded by degenerative cellular fragments. So essentially, these are gunk that builds up in your brain. And anytime you have gunk anywhere in your body, it's a bad thing, right? It's going to let things not work the way they should. And then you have neurofibrillary tangles, which is where you have neurons essentially tangled up like Christmas lights. And again, they're not going to function well, just like Christmas lights. It's like you took down your Christmas lights, you threw them in a box. You didn't try to organize them at all. That's what happens to neurofibrillary tangles only in your brain. This is what a neurotic plaque looks like, an amyloid plaque. Again, gunk in the brain, not good. Another thing that happens with Alzheimer's is we have brain volume loss. So you can see a healthy brain versus that of someone with Alzheimer's. And this is what happens to neurons over time in Alzheimer's. So you can see they're just basically very much. There are changes in neurotransmitters as well. So you have a pattern of decreases in neurotransmitter function altogether. And it's going to be in pretty much all of your receptors, which is pretty problematic because we know how much neurotransmitters do for our brain. What causes it? We don't know exactly. There is an early onset Alzheimer's that we know is genetically linked. So that one for sure we can actually test for in family members, see if they have it. Then we have a theory that it might be trace metals. So this caused a panic about like using aluminum pots or deodorants with aluminum a few years back. So far, there's not a causal relationship between those. So this one's questionable. It could just be this is a symptom rather than a cause, right? That you can't process a linear maybe as well when you have Alzheimer's. Some have suggested this might be essentially an autoimmune disease, that anti-brain antibodies can cause this sort of degeneration. There's a decrease in blood flow to the brain. So is this also a vascular dementia? Something to ponder. These abnormal proteins are really important. So amyloid beta, the tau protein, presenilin proteins produced by mutated genes. These cause those plaques that dump in the brain. That's, again, really bad. Think about plaques in your arteries, for example, that can cause things like heart attacks. So we see people progress very slowly through this disease. This is a disease that does not kill quickly, but unfortunately does kill. And so people with this disease will start with problems in their recent memory. That is often difficult to pin down as Alzheimer's because of the natural forgetting that occurs with age. They'll start to have more difficulty with their remote memory, so things, further back. Eventually, they won't even be able to recognize their own family members, which you can imagine is difficult for the family members as well as the patient. They will have impairments on the WACE test, that intelligence test. And if you give them any type of test for memory, it's going to be names of objects, distinguishing objects in a category, word list remembering like I gave you at the beginning of this. They also eventually end up with language impairments where they have difficulty even speaking, unfortunately. So you go from, again, this sort of mild where you might have some memory impairment and word finding difficulties, and then that goes to moderate where you've got maybe some spatial and motor functioning problems. You get to severe. They're unresponsive at times. There's severe memory loss. They can't make judgments or solve problems. When you get to the moderate to severe, there's no pretense of independent functioning. They have to be either taken care of full time by a caretaker or be in some sort of nursing facility. Again, here you can see healthy versus damaged neurons. So very problematic. One other disorder I want to touch on here that's related to memory is Korsakoff syndrome. So Korsakoff syndrome is related to severe alcohol use disorder, alcohol abuse, alcohol dependence. And so it's characterized by both anterograde and retrograde amnesia, just like HM. And confabulation, which is where they'll sort of make things up to fill in the gaps that they don't have. They're not great at conversation. They lack insight, and they have a lot of apathy. So what we discover at Korsakoff syndrome is it's caused by a lack of vitamin B1, which is also called thiamine, resulting from this alcohol intake. And it can damage all of these areas of the brain. The way that alcohol companies decided to solve this, because unfortunately, these individuals are often some of their best customers, right? And they were dying, so they were losing business, is alcohol companies, when this information came out, started adding vitamin B1 to the alcohol. One thing I want to talk about to just sort of spin this and talk about positive aspects of memory, there are several things that can happen where you actually have better memory than typical individuals. So Asperger's syndrome, which is now just part of autism spectrum disorder in the DSM-5, is where individuals have high intellectual functioning and often have excellent memory abilities. And as part of that, you can have savantism, be a savant. So you have a special ability in math, memory, music, things along those lines. The movie Brain Man has a great example of this. And then there's also something called HSAM, highly superior autobiographical memory, where you have incredible memory ability. You can recall events in your life from every day of your life, whether social events, To me, that sounds overwhelming, but you know, it is an enhanced memory ability. So I hope that this helps in illuminating some of these topics, and thanks so much.